Hello and welcome back to another game of Beyond All Reason. Today we are back on Supreme Isthmus as usual, and this build was supposed to come out last week. I do apologise, unfortunately I had some issues with my microphone, so I went out and I bought a new one. Hopefully the audio is all sorted. I guess if the audio is bad, then you will not be listening to this. Anyway, getting straight into it. Today we're going to be going over an air build guide by Blossom. I believe that's how you say his name. There's a random X in there, but that's fine. And instead of going Cortex, which I'd argue is the more meta build, simply because they're the regular fighters are faster and the regular bombers are just better in general, he's actually going to go for Armada. Now, I think Blossom here has got a fantastic build in that he uses Liches. Now, Liches are one of my personal favourite, units, let alone air unit in the game. And that's simply because I don't know quite what it is. It's something is so magical about just sort of dropping a nuke on somebody. It's so satisfying. And today I'm going to go over a build that's going to allow you to do just that. Right, so to start off with, he's going to go for 3 metal extractors, and he's actually going to go into 2 solar collectors. Now, if the wind is sitting quite high at the time of finishing that third mex, then feel free to go into 4 windmills, which is what a lot of people do. But again, even if the wind is dropping a little bit, I would say the solars are perfectly fine. Air units are very, very energy dense. They really do not require too much metal, and you're not going to run out of metal for a long time. By the time you do, you're going to have your energy situation sorted, so you can always reclaim these. Now, another thing that is quite common about the air role is you're going to build quite a bit more build power than maybe some of the other roles. And that's simply because you're going to have the metal to build it. And you're going to have the energy income to actually, I guess, use the build power perfectly. Right. So he's going to hand out a transport and a scout to both of his sea players. One thing I will say is it's normally a good idea to hand off a fighter to this player down here. I mean, it's good to hand off a fighter to this player as well, just to sort of shut down any scouting or anything. But handing off a fighter to this player here allows him to bring it down here and potentially snipe the enemy commander that's going to want to take this here. If he does manage to snipe the commander, that's going to put him in a massively advantageous position. And it'll even allow him to actually claim the island. And if he doesn't claim it, and he does snipe the commander, feel free to bring a constructor down and claim it yourself. Now then, in between making these, whenever he sort of bottoms out on energy, he's going to turn around and make a couple windmills. He makes 3 here. In your games, you may have to go up to, say, 4 or 5. Again, it is very wind dependent. As you can see there, he's immediately going to put another one in as soon as that transport finishes. And I think that's, even though he's actually got plenty of energy, I think that's more of an efficiency thing. So, in case you don't know, once a unit finishes, it actually takes about a second to 2 seconds to actually take off from the aircraft plant. And in that time, you can't queue up another one, so the build power is wasted. Whereas if you turn your commander around, you can actually put the build power into a wind turbine rather than wasting that. Now, one thing he is going to do that is a little bit different is immediately he's going to make himself a transport as well. Bearing in mind this is after he is handed off to his allies. Not quite sure why this player isn't taking these mexes. He might be a little bit of a lower skill player. But that's still fine, even though he hasn't paid for it, it's still best to hand it off to him. And after he's done that, so he's made himself a transport, he's now going to go into an aircraft constructor. And that's primarily going to be for the build turrets. One thing that some people do is they will buy a T1 constructor off of this player here. And that's simply because the bots are just better metal per build power. So 110 metal for 80 build power, whereas the aircraft are 110 metal for 60 build power. Doesn't make a massive difference, and the actual plane is able to fly. So you don't have to wait for the bot to walk all the way around. So he's going to immediately go up to 3 construction turrets, which is, for any other sort of situation, for any other build, this would be a little bit too many. If you was to go for 3 here, you'd probably end up stalling out on metal, unfortunately. The same can be said for the other rolls. But the air, you don't really use that much metal. So he's going to make a transport for this player, and that's simply because he's going to have T2 up soon. He's selling it, as he just states there, so he's going to be teching. And that's simply so he can hand them out. In the meantime, he's used that transport to bring his commander over here to take that. If he was to send just a single aircraft, it would take quite a while to actually get that up, simply because it only has 60 build power. Whereas the commander has 300, so that's going to be getting up nicely. It's going to continue scaling his wind economy, and that's in between making the construction turrets and any transports or fighters or scouts that your team may require. In fact, the T2's up already. I believe he has paid for this already, and he's going to take the first T2 that comes out and then provide the transport. Now then, he's going into an energy storage, and that's simply because he is relying on wind he's relying on wind quite a lot. So if I quickly slow it down to explain it here while he builds some energy converters. Oh, unfortunately, a fighter does leak through. I expect that fighter is going to be able to get the construction aircraft. One sort of cheeky thing you can do is immediately rush out a nettle. They're really cheap, and it will deal with this fighter quite well. Alternatively, if you can get the commander underneath it, the commander actually does shoot air with its little laser, and that's its primary weapon. So it's not the D-gun or anything, it's got a static weapon on it that it automatically fires, and it can hit air units. Anyway, going back to what I was saying. So when the wind drops to, say, 1 or potentially even lower, you're going to be a little bit of a stall, because you don't have those solars anymore. You've eaten them back up, and your wind is going to stall out. The energy storage allows him to bank up to 7,000 rather than the 2,000 that he would normally have. So if the wind does plummet, he's got a bit of a bank that he has to burn through before he is completely bottoming out. It just gives a little bit of space for you to continue going, even when the wind does drop. And if the wind doesn't drop for too long and it goes back up pretty quickly, then you shouldn't bottom out on energy whatsoever. Now, an argument can be made for making at least 3, 4, 5 fighters to start off with, just to stop any sort of bombing runs from single bombers that come over. It is something that I would recommend. But he's immediately going to reclaim his lab, build 1 more construction turret, and then start upgrading his mexes with the T2 that he bought from his teching player. This is actually very early, so sometimes your teching player, if he doesn't follow a good build, then it can take a little bit longer. Some of the best builds out there I've seen are able to get a T2 out at, say, 4.5 minutes, 5 minutes. That's probably what you're sort of aiming for. If you are going to be teching, I do have a few builds on the channel that lay out quite nicely good builds in order to get that T2 out nice and early and nice and efficiently. And he's going to use his air transport to ferry his advanced construction bot around. Now this unit is very, very slow. That's why I say hand off a air transport to the player that is teching, because if he was to hand that T2 constructor to this player here, it would take an age for it to walk all the way there. It's much easier just to sort of carry it. In fact, he's also going to use it to move his commander around. He's also going to use it to move a construction turret around. Now this is something I've mentioned a few times, but I've never been able to actually display anybody doing it. But you're actually able to pick up con turrets with T1 and T2 air transports and move them around, so they're not quite as static as you expect. So 210 metal for 200 build power is absolutely god tier. It's the best sort of build power thing in the game, disregarding experimental units and experimental buildings. And the commanders, of course, because you can't really build commanders. As you can see there, he's picking it up. Normally the downside to them is that they are static and only affect a AoE, as you can see by this green line here. But the transport removes that con. It completely removes that con altogether, and you can actually move them around. In a second, what he's going to do is he's going to bring his T2 back, and you're actually going to see him utilize the construction turret in another way. So there we go, he's picked the T2 back up. He's going to bring the plane back as well, because all the build power matters. And he's going to immediately start on his fusion reactor. Now the commander's going to detonate here, and as you can see there, if you detonate the commander on the edge of the con turret's range, you can actually still reach it without damaging the con turret with your commander's explosion. He's immediately going to go into 2 more con turrets in the base, and that's simply because he has plenty of metal from the commander, and he is doing perfectly fine on energy. In fact, the wind has just dropped a bit, so he's stalled out on energy a little bit. But he is going to be a-okay. Now this is what he does. That spare con turret that was over here, he's going to pull over here, and he's going to drop it in the trees. Now, as I've mentioned before in a previous video, anything with build power is able to reclaim, and that includes con turrets. Now, if this player has claimed all these trees, you can always drop it, say, down here or down here, but 9 times out of 10, these trees tend to stay relatively untouched, so they're your best bet. So he's finished the other con turrets up in the base, so he's gone up to a total of 5 in the base, building the fusion reactor, as well as 1 down here reclaiming. Again, it'd probably be a bit more efficient if you asked one of your allies for a resbot or 2 so that you could actually eat up the trees. But I think the reason he brought this con turret down here is just to bank a little bit more energy. As soon as he finishes the fusion reactor, he's going to be completely set, and he's going to be able to actually take advantage of that straight away. So he's going to go into another con turret, and he's immediately going to start producing T1 energy converters. Now, there is the difference between T1 energy converters and T2 is the T1 only costs 1 metal per second, but they're a little bit less efficient and also very they're spatially needy, so they take up quite a bit of space. If you're trying to build compact, then these probably are not the ones that you want to go for, because when one detonates, unfortunately all of them nearby will chain react. And if you've got too many together, it can ripple right the way through your base. The T2 con turrets, sorry, the T2 energy converters on the other hand are a little bit more expensive. I believe they are 380 metal. So they're quite a bit more metal compared to the one, but they're a little bit more efficient. So I believe over the course of 3 to 4 minutes, they will pay back the metal cost and be pure profit for you. So short term, it's always best to go for these. If you're thinking long term and you think the game's going to go the distance, feel free to go for the T2s. Now he's going to use his construction aircraft to build these energy converters, and if you notice, he's only going to turn his con turrets around and build them when he is going over on the energy slider. The rest of them are going to be going up to that fusion reactor. Now, even though he is flooding metal, he really doesn't need too many more. How many has he got now? He's gone up to 20, so 21, 22, 23. This is a little bit more than I was expecting him to go for. Because when you're building the T2 Air, it is incredibly energy intensive, as I've mentioned. With the Lich itself being 46,000 energy. That is a lot. And then the stealth fighters being 5,700 energy. That is, I mean, that's still an awful lot for 140 mil. So 9 times out of 10, when you're all powering these out, you are going to be lacking a little bit of energy income. That's unless you've gone for an extra fusion reactor, which I would argue is not the best play. Now, the previous one that I went over, Bearded Coda, he would actually only be getting his second fusion reactor up at this point. So, as you can see here, Blossom has been a little bit quicker with his fusion reactors. I'm going to slow it down a bit, just to go over a sort of... So, Bearded Coda, what he did previously, was he relied a little bit more on his wind turbines. So he had a little bit more of wind economy. Now it did set back his fusion reactor by a little bit, but at the same time I'd argue that both of the builds are very viable. This build is a little bit more compact with rushing out the 2 fusion reactors, but it's a little bit less efficient wind-wise. If you have a game where the wind is constantly dropping, then this build is going to be the better build. But if you've got a game where the wind is going to be consistently at 19, then I believe Bearded Coda's build is a little bit more efficient. Unfortunately, I can't tell you whether a game is going to be wind efficient or whether it is not. So it's a case of hit and miss. But I believe this one is a little bit more stable because you are relying on those fusion reactors rather than the wind. Now then, getting on to the T2 aircraft. The first thing he builds is the Lich. Now unfortunately, the T1 of Armada does not have any shurikens of the likes, so it can be quite sort of passive. So you can't, if there's a run by, you can't really interact too well. With the T2, I'd argue to build the Lich first if maybe there is a run by, but at the same time it takes so long to build, I would much prefer to see the high winds out first. And that's simply because if your enemy, in this case it is going to be K-Corp, which is a very good player, as you can see he's gone more for the wind sort of economy compared to the second fusion. And that means he's got his T2 out a little bit quicker. He's not quite making as much energy. As you can see, K-Corp 1.98k, so we'll say 2k. Whereas Blossom is 2.34k. But at the same time, he started producing units sooner. Now with the air, you are in direct competition with each other, unfortunately. So that means that very little of the actual air combat is going to be down to your allies and the enemy's allies, and it is mainly going to be you versus that air player. There is no lane, so it doesn't look that obvious, but that is how it plays out. Occasionally, one of the other players, often whoever ends up ecoing, or sometimes even the lake spawn position, will go for an air build just to help their player out. But it is not the most common thing in the world. That being said, you need to make sure you have plenty of fighters out. If you are even a little bit suspicious that the enemy might have more fighters than you, then you need to be producing fighters rather than going for this Lich, because this Lich is incredibly expensive. As you can see there, 2,200 mil. I believe the reason he goes for it is because he has the metal still. As he's finishing up the fusion reactors and then building the energy converters, his metal does build up. So I guess rather than going for metal storage, he wants to get the Lich out first just to take advantage of that. But at the same time, I would argue that the fighters are much better. Now then, with the criticism out of the way, I would also like to point out that he is going to play this absolutely fantastically. I believe the player lagged out a bit there. He has handed it over to Blossom. Blossom will give it back. That's fine. Right. So he plays this absolutely fantastically. As you can see from this, K-Corp has 10 high winds, whereas Blossom has 18. K-Corp also has this down here. So one of the things that he's doing is he's hiding fighters down here, because he doesn't want his opponent to know just how many fighters he's got. So if we go over to Blossom's view here, he has sent a few scouts in. He's managed to get them to about here, and then he's seen this screen of fighters here. He has also seen the fighters that are grouped up down here, which is why you saw that drawing there. So at the moment, he doesn't know how many fighters K-Corp has. Unfortunately, it is a lot harder to play the game rather than spectate it. It's much easier to spectate it when you have full vision of everything. But at the end of the day, when you're playing from this position and you're relatively blind, if you make a mistake by overestimating how many fighters you've got or underestimating how many fighters the opponent's got, then you are going to lose it. So it's all about pulling the trigger on that attack at the correct time. Now, one good thing to do is posturing. So as you can see here, this player has full control of this ocean. So something that K-Corp could do is actually build, say, 1 or 2 bombers, communicate with his teammate to maybe get some AA up here, and posture those bombers and those fighters in this vicinity. It's almost a case of baiting Blossom into moving his fighters over the AA. And that's another reason why I bring up the fact that you want to be pulling the trigger at the correct time. Even if you have the same amount of fighters and bombers as the enemy, if you're fighting over enemy bases, chances are you're going to have a little bit of AA, or you're going to have a little bit of stray fire that is going to be taking fighters out, and you are eventually going to lose. And it's a very volatile matchup, air versus air, because as soon as you lose all your fighters, the enemy is going to push everything else through, and they are going to end up bombing you. And they're going to have a free bomb run, unfortunately. Oh, there we go. That's what I mean by just so satisfying. There's something so magical about that. So we can get a little bit closer. We'll drop it. Oh, that's why I love these. I love these units so much. Right, there we go. So there's part of the posture in there. As you can see, he's immediately come in. He knows for a fact there's no AA here because he's got units there, and he's going to do a feint charge. Now Blossom does pull back. It's very easy to get sort of trapped into this. I believe Blossom would win the engagement here, but he has no idea how many units K-Corp has. So if he engages this and he forces his hand, then there is the potential that K-Corp is going to say bring bombers around here. He's going to catch him off guard, and that's something that he doesn't want. Now I believe he did hit this with a scouting. As you can see, there's a few more scouts in there. But I believe he did scout this out, so he knows that there's no bombers in there, so that he knows that this unit of planes here cannot actually do any damage, which is why he pulled back. If there were bombers in there, then 100% I would have engaged. Blossom probably would have engaged as well. But it is better to play it safe than actually just sort of force things. Okie dokie. I believe Blossom is going to reclaim his lab and go into a third fusion at some point here. I think K-Corp is going to do a similar thing. No, K-Corp is going to continue scaling his wind economy. In fact, as you can see now, K-Corp has actually taken over Blossom. So K-Corp is at 3.3k energy income, and Blossom is at 2.5k energy income. So that's something that you need to bear in mind while you're producing these. It's often worth, say, picking a construction turret up, placing it over here, and then building wind around it. Rather than building in tight rows of 2, if you highlight it all, so drag it out as if you were going to produce a big square of windmills, and then press the X key, then it will space them out by 1, and that will stop them from chain reacting when one of them blows up. So I've just skipped ahead 20-30 seconds or so, and this is the next major thing that's going to happen. So I believe he's realized that he is slightly behind K-Corp. He has scouted quite a lot of the windmills. I believe he sent the scouting through this way, and then snuck one round, which is why he's got a little bit of scouting information over here as well. But I believe he is anticipating that K-Corp has expanded his economy and that he thinks that he has fallen behind, which he would be correct in assuming. So what he's going to do is he's going to reclaim his T2 lab and then put all the metal that he got from reclaiming that into this fusion reactor. Now he does have a little bit left over, which I would argue should be used to build the converter straight away so that you can take advantage of the energy that fusion reactor is making you and turn it into metal, which is what you're currently lacking for this T2. And the reason he's gone for an advanced energy converter rather than going for more T1s like he was doing is because he thinks this game is going to last. Now, this over a longer period of time, I believe 4 or 5 minutes or so, this is much better and is just more efficient. So that's another thing. K-Corp is continuing to posture in a way that is rather aggressive. As you can see, Blossom is not taking the bait. It is incredibly tempting to, say, pounce on a group of fighters like this. But he's essentially trying to drag Blossom into a fight that he doesn't want to take. Then neither player really know exactly how many fighters they have. It's one of the hardest skills in the game, I would argue, for me and other players. It's one of the hardest skills to learn as well. I think it's something you pick up as you continue to play the game and as you think about it, but it's the when you should engage, when you shouldn't engage, and whether or not your enemy has more units than you. So if we take a look from K-Corp's point of view, we have no information other than when he sends a scout in. Whereas if we take a look from Blossom's point of view, again, he doesn't really have a massive amount of information. He knows there's an air wall, he knows that K-Corp has quite a few air units, but he can't exactly select them all and check. So if I select all of Blossom's at 94, we go ahead and select all of K-Corp's, he actually has 76. So Blossom has more, but he doesn't know that. And that's because K-Corp has gone into bombers. Now normally with the Cortex bombers you want to go for 7, 8, maybe even 9. But unfortunately Armada bombers just aren't quite as good. So you're going to need 10, 11, 12. And K-Corp overdoes it a bit here. It goes up to, I believe, 20 something. So he's got 15 already. I believe he goes up to 22, 23. Now this is a heavy commitment. Bombers are 12,500 energy, whereas fighters are 5,700. So they're over twice the cost of a regular fighter. So this is a very big investment that he's making. Look at the camera he's up to. He's up to 19 already, and he's got another 6. So he's going to go for about 25, 24. I believe he cancels a few there. And this is what Blossom is going to look out for. So these are currently unscouted. We're going to Blossom's point of view. He has no idea. But it's going to force, this push here is going to force K-Corp's hand, and this is what he's looking out for. So as you can see, he's starting to move in, so he's going to position himself because it looks like K-Corp's going, and this is where he decides to engage. You can see there, he immediately draws the lanes, and that's because he has seen these bombers. These bombers have been forced to come out and deal with the front line, otherwise the red player is immediately going to die. And immediately seeing how much energy and metal K-Corp has put into those bombers, Blossom just knows that he is going to win that fight no matter what. And that's simply because he's been scouting. So he's seen that K-Corp has actually been building quite a lot of fighters, and he's not ecoed for 20 minutes straight with aphyses. He knows that he's been on relatively even footing, and as soon as he sees that many bombers coming out from somebody, he knows for a fact that he has produced more fighters. And that's just simply just on resource terms. Now that's not the most obvious thing in the world at all. I mean, it took me, if I'm honest with you, I did look at the replay a few times before I realised quite exactly why I found it such a fantastic move. But I believe that is what he based it off. And that is something that is very difficult to learn. Right, so he's going to come back in with the Lich. I'd argue another Lich at this point would be particularly quite nice. I believe he's going to queue it up in a second. But the Lich is a very, very good unit because it is going to be able to one-shot fusion reactors. You can see it hits the T2 lab there. I believe it destroyed it does not destroy T2 labs in one hit. I believe it was the jammer bot that was currently building at the time. That explosion plus the Lich's bomb that actually detonated the factory there. But the fusion reactors, I know for a fact it takes out in one hit. Now the advanced fusions, as well as commanders, do take 2 hits to kill. So bear that in mind. And the advanced fusions and commanders, when they blow up, the explosion is big enough to hit air units, so the Lich will often die, unless you've managed to position it perfectly. Another thing I will say, please don't fly your planes over Razorbacks. It doesn't say anything about it on the tooltip, but they are incredibly fast firing. They fire lasers which are pinpoint, so they really don't miss at all. In fact, it's going to take the air player out here. It's going to drop the bomb on the fusion reactors. As you can see there, the bomb almost killed the Aphis, but the fusion reactor explosion was what finished it off and killing the Lich. But again, fighters only have 370 health. And Razorbacks fire very quickly, and they do plenty of damage to take out a fighter, and they've got direct fire weapons like that right there. So if you're flying your fighters and your bombers over Razorbacks, doesn't say that they're good anti-air in the tooltip, but they are very good at hitting air units. The bombers are a little bit more tanky, so they might survive a bit more, but fighters especially, please don't fly them over Razorbacks. Now another thing I want to go over quick, because the red team is going to resign in a little bit here. In fact, I think it takes a little while, is the target priority. So his friend was pushing in, and he immediately came in here, and he saw the T2 lab, and he decided to go for the T2 lab. And that's to prevent this player from building T2 units to try and counter this push. So that's a fantastic go right there. He then went for the fusion, which again is a fantastic idea. But then he came up here, and he took out the red players. It was actually the red player that had the advanced fusions up here, and he took out the red player's economy. Now the red player was already had all of his factories destroyed, and he was essentially dead in the water and not using that economy. I would much preferred if he had come over here. Thank you very much for that, spectators. I would much preferred if he came over here and took out this fusion reactor, because that would detonate this entire player's base. Alternatively, you can come down here and you can actually target the build power of the air player. So a single Lich shot here, it should take out all the construction turrets, and then the chain reaction from the construction turrets should take out the advanced aircraft plan. Now the reason I say that is because oftentimes this player will rely on a T1 air constructor to be building the construction turrets. So if you take this out, they will no longer have that constructor. Because obviously all the fighters coming in will destroy it. The bomb taking this out will stop all the sort of build power, and it will destroy the factory, and it is incredibly difficult for this player to recover. So they've got to not only get hold of another constructor, they've got to then start building more construction turrets with just the single constructor. They don't have a T1 air lab to build their own, so they're going to have to get it off of an ally, and it's going to have to walk all the way over here. Not to mention, actually building the lab again is going to be incredibly expensive, and 9 times out of 10 they're just going to be bottoming out on resources. It's going to give you free reign over the skies, so you're not going to have any fighters in the skies like he does now. So you are free to fly bombers in and absolutely cause chaos. That's unless another player such as this one decides to go into air, which he has. It's gone into a T1. Should probably go into T2 there, but I don't think it's. I think it's a little bit late now. But I mean, that's something that you do have to pay attention to. But again, I thoroughly agree with taking this player out to try and stop the player that was trying to hold the push. It just allows your team to come straight through and sweep. So he's immediately going to start building up his air wall again. I believe he did produce the Lich first, and he's actually reclaimed and gone into an advanced fusion. I mean, he definitely could have just built more fighters and ended the game. I suppose that is a little bit of a safer route, but again, I don't really like the advanced fusion, simply because it takes so long to get up. If this was another fusion reactor, it would be finished by now. You'd have another advanced energy converter down, and you'd be making use of all of this energy that's going to waste. In the long run, the advanced fusion reactor is more efficient, but because you get the return on the fusion reactor so quickly, it is much better to build 4, sometimes even 5 fusion reactors before you build your first Aphis. And that is simply because you will gather more metal and energy in the short term. And when I say short term, when it comes to the fusion reactor, I'm talking like 6-7 minutes. So that's why it is just better to build the fusions. Committing to an advanced fusion reactor like this, you are going to need more build power, which you can see I'm putting down now. but it just leaves you open for a counter-attack. So if K-Corp was to build a Lich now, or a couple bombers, I believe he would have more than enough. He's got 36 fighters out. As you can see, Blossom's only got 31, so he would be able to take that out, and he would be able to potentially counter-bomb. I mean, he is on the back foot, unfortunately. 8v8s, as soon as you're on the back foot, it's almost like a compounding effect, or say a snowballing effect. So the team has access to less players, less metal, and just less resources in general. And so they are eventually going to bleed out. Ooh, I do apologise for that voice crack. I'm a grown man, I promise. Okie dokie. So I'm going to fast forward to the end of the game here. It is essentially over. I believe one of these players stalls it out for a little bit longer than it needs to be. While I am an advocate for not ending the game and resigning instantly. As you can see there, yeah, K-Corp, this player. A lot of the players have left the game, so it's essentially over. Here we are at the end of the game. A couple of Razorbacks that leaked through and destroyed this player, and a nuke actually ended up hitting this player because of that poorly placed anti that Spectre mentioned earlier. And that sort of sealed, put the final nails in the coffin, so to speak.
Battle ended.
So I'm just going to pause it quick. Oh. Well done to Will Ramos. Fan of Lorna Shaw myself, if I'm honest with you. But I believe he was the eco player down here, the Tekken player. Did the most damage. Going to go onto the graphs quick. So metal used, you can see here, Blossom relatively low down, but on the far as energy used, Blossom actually going quite high towards the end there. I believe that was when he was finishing his third fusion. Energy produced, again, because the air roll requires so much energy. That's something you can see there. In fact, K-Corp you can see before he actually ended up getting taken out. Metal produced, not quite as much as, say, the other players, because that's, again, it is very energy dense to go air. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you in the next one.